Welcome to the Stoked, where each week we bring you an inspiring athlete, adventurer, or entrepreneur and dig into their stories and strategies for balancing work, life, and adventure while having fun and making a difference. I'm Jonathan Ronzio.
And I'm Emily Holland. Thanks for joining us today.
Let's get to it. Welcome back to the Stoked. How you doing, Emily? Are you working on any problems?
Problems? Lots of problems.
You got some problems right now?
I got 99 problems. No.
Any climbing problems, I guess. I can specify.
Yeah, I have one. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to jinx it.
You don't want to jinx it?
It's up in Romney, New Hampshire, and I have personal goals that I want to get to, but I'm not going to say it on the Stokecast until
come on.
It's done.
This is the place for goals.
Okay, I am not good at leading. I have a fear problem, so I'm trying to lead harder climbs. So I'm trying to lead. This is so basic. I'm trying to lead a 10A.
That's
up in
fine.
Romney.
That's
that means
awesome.
nothing to people who don't climb, but that's not that hard. So Emily is not a great climber.
It's hard enough. That is leading a 10A is great.
Yeah. Do you have any problems in your life? Projects.
I'm currently
projects. That's what it's called. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, you're right. Totally.
Yeah.
Problem. You got any problems?
You guys will understand what a project is from this interview with Kris Hampton.
Bouldering problems I've heard before.
So true.
But projects is, yeah. So
like something you're working on.
I had the terminology mixed up. I currently...
It's okay.
I've got lots and none for problems. and as far as climbing projects, there's nothing I'm working on. I need to get climbing a little more prevalent in my life again. It's fallen to the wayside as I've prioritized trail running. But
who do we have on today?
We've got Kris Hampton on today. He is the founder of Power Company Climbing and the host of the Power Company podcast, and really great guy. This one was fun because while Kris is a climber, he's also very much an entrepreneur, businessman, and so as much as we love chatting with the professional athletes, it's also really cool to chat with somebody whose main thing is the business and the athlete is on the side, right?
Yeah. I love talking to him because his backstory, he took what he learned from underground hip-hop and applied it to becoming an entrepreneur and building his climbing training business.
Yeah.
Which, we're not going to spoil anything. He'll tell you what that means, but I don't know. I wouldn't put those parallels together myself, so I'm glad he laid it out for me. And it's a good lesson that you can learn from, other... interests that you have and pull those into building your own business and creating your own passion. That's it. That's really it.
That is it.
I mean, he's going to tell us a lot more about it, but I hope you enjoyed this interview with Kris Hampton.
Yeah, it's a good one. So stay tuned for Kris and also for, we'll check in on an update on Emily's 10A.
Now you've put me in a weird position.
This is why you didn't want to say it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, we will not give you that update because it might not happen, but we shall see.
All right, enjoy the chat with Kris. We are here with Kris Hampton of Power Company Climbing. Really excited to talk to you, man. Thanks for joining us.
Man, thanks for having me. It's super cool that you guys are doing this thing, and I'm excited for the other guests that you have.
Yeah, no, it's been fun since we started the podcast up, and you have one yourself, right? How long have you been going?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm just a podcast junkie, so I feel like I've been doing it since podcasts began, but that's totally not true. It's been a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years at this point.
You have 100+ episodes now. Did you hit 100 or did I miss that? Yeah, you.
Nope, I think I'm at 95 now.
Okay,
96 will go out this week.
Yeah. Nice. That's awesome. So when we were setting up the interview today, can you tell us a little bit about why we wanted to plan it around the morning time versus the later in the day slot?
Yeah, so right now I'm just working on a project up in Sinks Canyon, a climbing project, and it goes into the shade in the evening. So I just like to keep the evenings open depending on how I feel and what the weather's looking like, and that way I can run up there if I need to.
So real quick, we probably have listeners that are into a multitude of outdoor sports, and for people who are not into climbing, what is a project?
So basically it's just a really hard rock climb that ends up becoming a rehearsed routine to be able to make it through without making a mistake and falling off. Really similar to a difficult gymnastics routine, but up a rock face.
Nice.
Cool.
So yeah, that was definitely very cool when we got your reply back on
Yeah.
This is going into the shade, so I need this to be in the morning.
We were texting back and
Yeah.
forth, and we were like, this guy is going to be rad. I'm so excited to talk to him.
Well, it speaks volumes about how you plan your life, how you schedule things, right? It's like you're very dedicated about the work-life adventure balance to weave the things in that you love and put the rest around it.
Yeah, and I think once it becomes your business and it's already your passion, you almost have to schedule that way. There's no other way to keep it both going,
Yeah.
So a little about that. Do you want to kind of talk about how your passion became your business, or just the evolution of what you're doing?
Sure. So I quit climbing for a while. I'll give you the short, abridged version here. I had quit climbing for a few years, and when I came back to climbing, I realized I had a giant hole in my skill set, and I wanted to close that gap and see how good I could become as a climber. A guy that I had considered a mentor had died of a heart attack while climbing, and something he said in an online forum years before, he said that Kris isn't an overachiever, he's an underachiever. He does just enough to get noticed, and then he bails out. And he was absolutely right.
Wow.
So when I came back, I decided I want to see how good I can become. And I started really training hard and learning as much as I could about training. And in the climbing world, there wasn't a ton of info on training. There were a few books. Eric Hurst is an American trainer who's probably the biggest name in that industry. And I read all of his books and all the other things that were available. And then I started looking into other sports and learning how other sports trained. And I had been a gymnastics coach, so I understood some of it. And it just became this thing where I was in the gym training a lot, and my friends were like, can you help us train? And I started a blog to sort of, blogs were really popular back then. So I wanted to document my journey, and that just grew and grew and grew until other people from all over the world were asking me to help them train. And now it's a business with, I've got 4 total coaches and an office assistant, and keeps me probably way busier than I should be, but it's good.
Yeah,
I love
that
it.
is good. So at what point did it scale from you doing one-on-one coaching and just like your voice through the blog to kind of developing courses and like ebooks and things like that could scale beyond your time while you were working on a project?
Yeah, so I actually got really lucky with this, and I know that I recognized at the time that I was really lucky, so I was able to kind of grab that opportunity. I was a mural painter, that was my career, and I had injured my shoulder at work. So I was on workers' comp and getting paid to basically sit on the couch and do nothing. And that same winter, I had written about 40 training plans for people all around the country. And each one came with a 2-hour phone call to describe the plan and explain how to do each exercise. And through those 80 hours of phone calls, I just thought there must be a better way to deliver these training plans, because this is absurd. I can't be on the phone for 80 hours and then never have any communication with those people afterward. They would just disappear into the ether, So I set up my platform on an app that was already available for fitness training, and customized it to my liking, and recorded a bunch of videos and wrote descriptions. And then pretty much as soon as I put it online and said, we're going to do this as a business, I realized within 2 weeks that I have to quit my career entirely to be able to make this thing work, because it was so busy right off the bat.
Wow.
That's awesome. So you have a good base of people who were just really psyched about your type of training. So you had kind of a nice list already built up, it seems like. But then also it took off. So actually, let's go back to what something that you emailed me earlier today, which is your type of training, or the way that you like to model your business and the way that you train athletes. So you said it's based off of underground hip hop. So I love that.
So not the training, but
Okay.
the business model in general. I knew nothing about business, but I had been a rapper for a lot of years. I
Love
put out my
it.
first tape in 1993, I think, while I was in high school. Actually, earlier
Was
than
it
that, probably
actually a tape?
1990.
Like a cassette?
It was actually a cassette tape.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yep. Throwing it back. I
Yeah, I
like
think
it.
I had
That's awesome.
graduated to CDs by 93. So
Nice.
it was definitely my first was definitely a cassette tape sometime around 90 or 91. And I had been involved in the Cincinnati hip hop scene for a number of years. So I got to see how some of the really successful hip hop artists who came out of that really niche underground scene, people like Atmosphere and Mr. Dibbs and Soul
Nice.
Position and Blueprint and Idea and Abilities and all these groups who became underground legends, I got to see how they operated. And I knew that I needed a tour, and I knew that I needed a mixtape, something free content to put out, and the ability to go out and see my audience and put my face in front of them. So that's essentially how I ended up building the business. Was I put out the podcast? That's my mixtape. I put it out. I put it out almost weekly, and then I tour a lot. I go to gyms all across, and mostly the Midwest. Actually, I hit the Midwest quite a bit because a lot of the pro climbers don't make it there. They seem to get forgotten. These flyover states. So I spend a lot of time out there just meeting the climbers and doing workshops and doing clinics and climbing with everybody. And that's gone a really long way. So yeah, it was based off of knowing how underground hip hop artists succeed.
I love that.
So rad.
Yeah, approach building your business like an underground hip hop artist.
Yeah,
That's rad.
It was the only way I knew, so.
So
what I did.
Kris, you were a rapper, a muralist, now a podcaster, an entrepreneur, of course, a climber, an MC, like lot of different pursuits in your life. Where
It makes you wonder if I could be good at one of them, or
I was
if
thinking,
I'm just being
yeah.
mediocre at all of them. I don't know.
Well, that's a good question. How do you feel about that? I struggle with that. I'm sure a lot of people struggle with that, of like wanting to do too many different things and feeling like, is it good to be that pretty good Swiss Army knife, or should you be, specifically focused on cutting one type of cheese?
That's
Sure,
such a
sure.
weird metaphor. Cutting
totally
shoes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I've struggled with it as well, for sure. How good could I be at whatever if I would focus on that thing? But it's just not my nature, and I'm not going to fight that. I love doing all these different things, and it seems like when I have a passion, when I really love to do something, that I have almost endless energy for it, as long as my fiance brings me sandwiches or something. Otherwise, I get very, very hangry.
Good note for people trying to work with you.
Yes, definitely. She's learned that. I didn't know that. I just thought I got angry. But as soon as I eat, I'm good. But I think especially when you're going to move into the entrepreneur space and try to build a business, you almost have to be, if you're starting from ground up, you have to be that Swiss Army knife. There's so much you're going to do on your own. It's going to be so DIY in the beginning that having a big skill set is a huge asset. So for me, that makes the most sense. And as a coach, it makes the most sense because I can appreciate that this person wants to be good at climbing, but they also have a family and a life and a
Right.
job and all these other things. So I'm not this, you have to be climbing this many hours and there's no other way. I'm like, well, I've learned to fit it into my busy life, so I can help you do the same.
Yeah, that's awesome. I struggle with that all the time because I think I want to give so much time to climbing. And I'm like, but I like running and I like hiking and I like
Yep,
this and
right.
I like that. So, but I think it sometimes leads to more fulfilling life if you have different pockets and you don't get so burnt out on that one thing. And you can still love climbing or love running as much as you do every time you do it. So it's not like a job. It's more of like a mental practice.
Absolutely. And I think as long as you're aware that it's a trade-off and you're essentially trading the idea that you could be much better at one of these things for the idea that you're happier doing many of the things, then I think it's great. If someone wants to focus on one thing, cool. I'm all for that too. But for me, it's just not the way.
Yeah.
Now, you said you had to learn how to fit climbing into your life of being a businessman, of being a now fiance, right? When are you getting married?
Yeah, or what's today's date? The 18th, 12 days.
Oh my gosh.
Congratulations.
He's
Thanks.
really fitting a lot in. He's fitting in this interview. He's climbing later.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm actually building a big training center in my extended garage.
Awesome.
And I'm in this mode of I have to get this done before I get married, So I think I'm stressing everyone here out.
Yeah.
I think I saw a picture of that on your Instagram. We should put it up on the page, but it looks so rad. You took some walls away and stuff, right?
Yeah. The garage, when we bought the house, had a finished room in it with a drop ceiling, and the first thing I did when we walked in was pop up through the ceiling to see what was up there and if I could remove the ceiling.
Nice.
And that's one of the first things we did when we moved in was tear that ceiling out. And then that was during the winter, so it was really cold. We left some walls in. Now that it's warm, we've torn all the walls out, and now we've got this pretty extensive 14-foot tall garage space that I can play with.
That's so
awesome.
cool.
I love how when someone, maybe a non-climber buys a house, they're like, oh, finished garage, that's such an added plus. I can't wait to have that as like a hangout space. And you're like, rip it all down. Let's build it over.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
My wife's parents built a house a couple of years ago, and I was like looking at there was just an area that was like perfect for a bouldering cave, and her dad wasn't into it for whatever reason.
Jeez, you never know.
That guy.
But yeah, I mean, so regarding like the sport, the business, your relationships, all these different projects, you said you've learned or are still learning how to balance that, and you lead from what you live, right? You teach other people how to do the same. Like what are some of the ways that you would teach people?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Definitely still learning. We just moved to Lander, Wyoming a year and a half ago, and a lot of that was on the road climbing, a lot of that year and a half. So I'm still learning it here as well because I don't understand the seasons, the conditions, the temperatures, the aspect of the climb, whether it's south facing, north facing, when it goes into the shade. I don't understand that as well here as I did in my original home area of Red River Gorge. So I'm still learning it here, and I'm struggling with it because all of that at the same time as a business that's kind of booming and hiring more people, and it's tough. And the thing that I would say to help people figure out how to do it is, number one, you have to understand the variables. Like I just mentioned with these climbs, I don't quite yet understand all of the aspects, all of the conditions, the different crags around here at different altitudes. So I'm still learning the finer points of when to go to which crag. You have to know those things to be able to fit them effectively into your schedule. Whether it's running, climbing, paddling, whatever it might be, there are aspects of those sports you need to really understand and really dial in. Then you need to know your schedule, whether it be work, family, other things that you need to take care of, yard work, housework. And those things need to be planned out, because what I see happen most often is if you say, oh, I'll just wait and see what happens, something's going to come up. It's just what we do as people. We fill up our time with things that often aren't fulfilling, that we just want to do in the moment. And then hours later, we're going, oh, why didn't I do this instead?
Yep.
So true.
You will always fill as big a backpack as you bring.
Absolutely.
You with the metaphors today. I just
I know.
He's fire, right?
He's got them. I think he's got them all written down.
Yeah, I feel like they're on this little whiteboard. Yeah, for sure.
List of metaphors. So yeah, I think scheduling is the most important part of all of it, and really planning out everything, making sure that on Monday, if you're going climbing on Wednesday, that your food is ready. You don't need to go to the grocery store on Tuesday night. You know, that your bag is already packed, that everything is ready for you, and make it easy on yourself to not say no.
Yeah, that's so true. I think one of the things that happens in my life, just as examples, I have a boyfriend who doesn't like to plan things. And so I'm always planning. Yeah. He's like, you need to just take a second. I'm like, no, if I don't put this time in my calendar, I'm not going to go do it. And so then I'm going to be mad that I didn't go do it. So do you think that there's any point, though, that tips over where it's like, I have to go climb, I have to go to my project, or I have to go run because it's in my calendar.
Where you've overscheduled.
Yeah, where you're feeling like maybe it's more laborious than you want it to be.
That's a really good question. And my first thought when you said that was, well, you just have to schedule in time to take a second.
So true. Truth bombs.
But yeah, I think that that's a common mistake that people make, that early on we'll schedule too little, we'll schedule too much, and eventually we find a happier place where we understand that I can't completely pack my schedule. I do need time to unwind, to sit down, that maybe I'm not just building into the schedule. But I think it's a learned thing. I think at first you have to err on both sides to really understand where the happy place for you is. And it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah. Now, do you have a certain scheduling app or life planning tool that you like to use? Or
no sponsorships.
Well, because I'm an old guy, and I use that word as my 17-year-old self, thinking that 44 was going to be incredibly old. Because I'm of that age, and I came from an era of you don't have a ton of apps. I'm still learning how to use them, and I've gotten really good at scheduling in my head, so I know when things are happening. But I do use Google Calendar, and I use it pretty religiously now. I use other task apps to keep myself on track, and then I have a whiteboard in the office that I don't think you can probably see the corner of it behind me, but I have a whiteboard up that I use to keep track of all the things, that the big projects at work that I need to work on.
Nice.
Now, what kind of a daily routine do you have? Are you that minute about how you schedule things, that you have a specific time you wake up and things you do every day, or?
When I was in Cincinnati, I had a very strict routine, and strict is probably the wrong word. There was wiggle room in there that I could switch things up if needed, but I had blocks of time that I have to get this thing done and then this thing done. Now it's pretty much become, I have my project that we talked about earlier called Endeavor to Persevere. It's a 13C in Sinks Canyon that I know is good in the evening. So mornings are get up, make coffee, of course,
yes.
First, always.
Always.
Yeah.
I just drag myself into the kitchen and start water.
Yeah, we just cut coffee, climb,
exactly.
repeat.
Yeah, I saw that. Everyone should just wear that shirt all the time.
For those listening, Jonathan's wearing a shirt that says coffee, climb, and repeat.
Right.
Okay, carry on, boys.
There are people listening? I thought we were just having a video chat here.
So, and I'm trying to get more into the routine of when my breakfast happens. As an entrepreneur, I get sucked into work, and then I'll look at the clock and realize it's noon and I haven't eaten anything, and I know my fiance is going to yell at me if I don't. So I'm trying to learn that routine better. In Cincinnati, I had a great routine. Now it's a little more cloudy, and I'm figuring it out.
So speaking of Cincinnati, so we've talked a little bit about what you're doing now, your project, of course, your company, but I want to kind of go back to your start. So you grew up in the Midwest, you got into underground hip hop. How does that happen, first of all? And then also you started getting into gymnastics and then climbing. So can you talk a little bit about your upbringing, where you come from, and how that plays into where you are now?
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in this tiny little town in Cincinnati, outside of Cincinnati, a little suburb that was an extremely racist town, actually.
Okay.
I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was very much it was all white until around 99.
Oh, wow.
A black family or two had tried to move in and had gotten run out of town.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's the type of place that it was. And that just never sat well with me. Partially, maybe because I had a neighbor that moved in when I was a kid, and he came from New York and brought hip hop with him. This was in the early 80s, maybe even 79, no, probably early 80s. And I immediately thought, this is something I've never heard. This is really interesting to me. This is the first time I've really, music has really connected with me. So I just sought it out.
What do you bring with him? Like, I'm interested what artists he brought.
The only things I remember for sure is that he had Houdini.
Okay.
And then I remember that he brought the Fat Boys to me, but I'm not sure if it was then or a little later, a couple of years later.
And that's like the beginning of hip hop, isn't it? The late 70s, early 80s? Yeah.
Pretty early, yeah. It was very early on, and none of the record stores in town had it. But by the mid 80s, I could ride my bike. By the time I was about 12, 13, I could ride my bike far further than I should have. My parents never would have let me ride my bike to these record stores. But I would ride my bike there, and they would get tapes for me. So I would save up my allowance money or my, whatever money I could make around the neighborhood and buy these hip hop tapes. So that just kept going through high school. My parents were also steeped in the same culture of this neighborhood. So we didn't see eye to eye. And when I was 16, I moved out and just lived with friends, lived wherever I could for the rest of my teenage years through high school. And that's sort of how I discovered gymnastics. There was a gymnastics gym, a famous gymnastics gym called Queen City Gymnastics that was down the railroad tracks from my neighborhood. And I would just walk down the railroad tracks because at the time I didn't live anywhere. So I was just wandering around doing whatever to fill my time. I would walk down the railroad tracks and go sit in their lobby and watch the gymnasts. And then I would go to a mattress factory that was in my neighborhood and take their mattresses out of the dumpster and learn the things that I had seen in the gym. And I ended up taking a tumbling class there. And the first day of the tumbling class, the guy said, "Where did you learn to do all this?" And I said, "Well, just by watching you guys. I would come and sit in the lobby and watch, and then I would go learn it out on the grass or on mattresses." And he said, "Well, do you want to teach a tumbling class?" So I ended up teaching there and eventually coaching the young boys team there.
Wow.
So it all sort of grew out of having parents that weren't very good parents.
Of just being able to venture out and explore and absorb and try and
yep, that was pretty much it. And so I don't advocate for having, just leaving your parents. I don't advocate for that at all. but I think that was how it worked for me.
Well, it
I
seemed
just needed to find my own thing.
Seemed like you had a good sense of yourself even early on, and some kids I think don't really have that, and they just kind of think what their parents are saying is true, and then they grow up and maybe they realize later on that what their parents are saying is not always true and not always fact. But you seem to have a really good sense of how you felt about the world and people around you and what you liked, and so that that guy at the gymnastics gym, was he like, yeah, that's fine. It's fine that you've just been watching and basically using everything that we learned. Like, did he kind of take a chance on you in that way? Do you feel like that was a big moment for you?
I do. Coming from a place where the people who are most important in your life don't seem to, not care is the wrong word, but don't seem to really pay attention to the things that you're really into. It was great to have these adults along the way who did. Mm-hmm. I had an art teacher, I had an English teacher, I had the people at the gymnastics facility. Those people definitely took chances on me, and that was really huge for someone whose parents never did that, who were more interested in their own thing. They were young parents, so they acted like young people.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of those big moments, like transformational experiences for your life, you mentioned early on in the conversation that there was a point where somebody had told you or talked about you, or you realized that you try really hard until you get to a point and then just give up and go and do something else. Like what changed and how did you become the person that would keep going and would keep getting better versus go chase the new idea or try the new thing?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think for me it was mostly a way to honor his memory, to be honest. His wife was a good friend of mine. His son was a friend of mine, and his son died shortly after, actually, in a car accident. So I felt like I needed to do something to honor that memory. And for me, it was, he's totally right about this, because when he said it, it stung. And he said it in this online forum, in the early days of online forums. And at the time, it felt like the biggest deal. So when he said it, it hurt. And I thought, the best way I can honor his memory, if he's the first person who's ever really picked this out and said, this is what Kris is doing, and he was absolutely right, then the best thing I can do is become that person that he was hoping I was going to be.
And what did you have to do to become that person?
Really just keep an understanding that the notoriety, the recognition isn't what I'm looking for. I'm looking for challenging myself instead of doing enough to get noticed, which is exactly what I was doing. And potentially I hadn't ever connected these two, but coming from this place where parents and the people who were important to me when I was younger weren't paying attention to the things I was doing, I was out there looking for recognition. I would do just enough in whatever it was, whether it was hip hop, climbing, skateboarding, all these things I was into. I would do just enough to get noticed until there was a little bit of buzz happening, and then I would move on to the next thing where I could get more recognition. Mm-hmm. So I had to switch into, let's make it challenging myself instead of let's go get the recognition.
That's powerful. I know I've been on the metaphor train so far, but I do have one more.
Oh no!
Well, so I was surfing, and normally I had surfed longboards, and my buddy had moved away. He left his shortboard with me, and so I took it down to some beach in Rhode Island, and it was just me and then one other kid in the water. It was like a 12-year-old boy. He was ripping, catching everything, and I was not. I was struggling on the shortboard, and so I asked him. I was like, dude, you have any tips? What should I do? And he watched me and just said literally one thing before he caught another wave, and he was like, keep paddling even after you think the wave has you. And I was just like, oof, holy hell.
That was the best one yet,
wow.
Jonathan.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
that was a good one.
It's across everything. You have a tendency to think you have the wave, and so you let up, and then it passes by.
You probably didn't even know what an effect that had on you.
I know.
That's crazy.
It's nuts.
Oh my gosh.
That's huge. You should just title a book that, and that's amazing.
Yeah, maybe I will.
Yeah, write that down on your little whiteboard. That's awesome. So speaking of looking for affirmation and recognition, so I feel like although climbing is such a individual sport, well, you obviously need a belay and a catch, but it's pretty individualized as far as your ability level. Like, yes, you need someone to trust on the ground, but for most climbing, but it's all about you and what you're putting into it. But it oftentimes becomes a really competitive thing. And especially I feel like with social media, with seeing all these people doing this rad stuff, you're like, oh, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get to that level, whatever it is. Does anyone come to you in their training and say that, like, they really want to get to the next level, but they just never feel like they can get there? And how do you advise people on comparing themselves to others?
That's actually a pretty tough question.
Don't worry about it then. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let's just move on. In some respects, comparison, I think, is important. Mm-hmm. And something that one of my guests on the podcast said once has really stuck with me. His name's Trevor Reagan. He runs a company called Train Ugly out of Denver. And he's a learning expert. And what he said that I've carried over into a lot of my coaching is that you should take it seriously, but not personal. And you should treat your improvement, your learning process, much like a scientist would. So a scientist would see failure. They would see something that someone else had gotten a better result. And rather than taking that personal and letting it hurt their feelings, it would be more, oh, what are they doing that I need to learn? What can I change to get a better result? So in that respect, if you can do that, I think comparison is important. You know, I'm inspired by the great climbers just as much as the next person is. I don't avoid those things for the sake of avoiding comparison. But I've gotten really good at not taking it personal. You know, that person has earned what they have in one way or another. And I would love to be able to watch them and figure out what it is that they're doing well that I can take a little piece of and get better at myself. So I think that's the biggest takeaway when I meet people, when I have clients who want to get better, they want to chase a specific difficulty level, and they're constantly comparing. I think it's that take it serious. You should. This should be an emotional thing for you. It should be something really important to you, but don't take it personal. You know, we'll do what we can do. All those people out there are doing what they can do.
Oh man, that was a good one too. Good nuggets.
Yeah, a lot of value packed into these 45 minutes or whatever this is.
I almost wrote that down, but then I just made fun of Jonathan for writing stuff down, so I'll write it down later. Speaking of your clients, so one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, I mean, obviously there's people who maybe aren't climbers, or they are, and they probably can resonate with what I'm about to say. Maybe, Jonathan, you can keep me honest here, but I feel like there are definitely lulls, highs and lows to climbing. You fall in love with it one day, and then maybe the next week you're like, I don't know why I ever climb. This is the worst thing ever. You could probably say that about any sport. But I think climbing has a way of like breaking you down and building you up specifically that is different than a lot of other sports. So what kind of, I guess, mental things do you do? Do you meditate? Do you have certain practices that you do with your clients that help them push through, like you said, the emotional aspects of climbing?
So that's definitely not my area of expertise, partly because I've never had the like fear issues while climbing, the motivation issues while climbing, other than what we've already talked about, that I had to realize that it was a personal challenge rather than looking for affirmation. So occasionally I do refer people out if their head is just not into it and they really want to be, but they can't figure out what's going on. I'll refer them out to someone else who does really focus on that area. Otherwise, for me, a lot of conversation is really helpful. Really trying to dig in. I learned so much from the guests on my podcast that I use in my coaching. And learning each individual person that I coach is really important, because some people respond very well to just, the classic old pushing by either, making fun of is the wrong word, but similar to that, pushing people in a very friendly kind of way. Some people respond to a different type of conversation. So learning each individual person is really important as well. I think I'm just getting off track here, but I think for me, that's the most important part, is individualizing the way that I approach each client.
So let's play to your strengths then. Before we wrap this up today, if somebody's going to come to you and they want to be physically a better climber, they need a training plan or bouldering or sport, whatever that is. What are the most fundamental things that somebody listening who is maybe stagnating or just wants to get started, that they can implement into their lives as far as easy training? What would you recommend for people getting going or trying to break through a new level?
Okay. Obviously it's different for each person. Climbing is really complicated, complex sport. There's so many different facets to it that I couldn't give, physical training advice that's very specific. Mm-hmm. But I would say that if you've stagnated, if you've tried hard, you've reached a point where you're not getting any better, the best thing you can do is take a step back, reevaluate what you're doing, make some changes. Change is incredibly important. We're adaptive creatures. It's what our bodies do. So you're going to adapt to any sort of stimulus that you're giving your body, and it's going to stop being an effective stimulus over time. Physically, if it's a physical workout, that usually happens in 4 to 6 weeks or so. So every 4 to 6 weeks, things need to change. If you've been doing something for a year that worked initially, and now you're just wondering why it doesn't work, so you just keep hitting it harder and harder and harder, then you're doing the exact wrong thing. And your body's just going, hey, we already know how to do that. We don't need to make any more changes. Chill out. Yeah. So you need to switch things up. And also, I would say that practice is the most fundamental part of any movement sport, of any sport in general, really, that climbers tend to miss. We want to get stronger fingers, which is a fundamental part of climbing harder. But I've not met a climber who can't climb better. And every other sport practices. Every other sport has time set aside to, at a lower level than game day, focus on the mechanics. And as climbers, we tend to go into the climbing gym, go out to the crag, and want to climb our hardest every single day, instead of dropping the level down and focusing on some part of that as practice, as deeper learning. So I think that's a part that, even the best climbers are missing from their game.
I love that.
Yeah,
definitely going to use that at the gym this week. Break it down a little bit more.
So let's go right into our last question, which is it's a twofold. It's what are you currently most stoked about, and also what does Stoke mean to you?
Oh damn! I knew you were going to ask that question, and then I totally forgot to think about it. so this is just going to be off the cuff here. Right now, I'm most stoked about building. And I don't mean that in just a, 2x4s and screws kind of a way, even though I'm doing that as well. but I'm also building a business. I'm learning to build a better relationship with my fiance as we move into a new part of the relationship. I have a 20-year-old daughter who turns 21 this year, who recently moved out on her own and is figuring out life and building the part of me that stands back and lets her make big mistakes without just picking up the pieces and, sliding a net beneath her is really important to me. So I think building is what I'm most stoked on. And
Nice.
For me, Stoke is, I want to say passion, but that sounds like a really cliche answer. So I think it's recognizing an opportunity, whether that opportunity is what you're really excited to do at that moment and passionate about, or it's an opportunity that comes your way that you didn't expect, and being able to latch onto that opportunity and use it to your benefit and capitalize on it, whatever that means to you. That's what Stoke is. That's when I get really excited, really passionate, really motivated to do something, is when I'm able to keep paddling even when the wave has me.
Yes, there it is.
Nice. Wow, what a callback. That's awesome, Kris. So where can people find out about power climbing, or about Power Company Climbing? How can they find out about you? All that good
So
stuff.
powercompanyclimbing.com is the website. We've got training plans for all levels, from beginner to really advanced climber, and those come in several different packages, from PDF ebooks that you can buy to plans that work through our app with no coach communication, to full communication, full custom plans that that we completely individualize to each climber. And then we also do workshops all over the place. You can find all that at powercompanyclimbing.com. We're also on Facebook at Power Company Climbing, on the Instagram at Power Company Climbing. And I check those messages like crazy. I try to get back to everybody. So if you have questions, definitely reach out. I'm always excited to talk about it.
Nice.
Awesome.
And we'll include those links in the
show notes. Yep.
show notes.
Definitely.
That's what it's called.
Cool.
Cool.
For anybody who wants to keep up with Kris, there you have it. You got all the links. Check them out. Check out Power Company Climbing. Check out it's the Power Company podcast, right?
Yeah, Power Company Podcast. You can find that on all the platforms. If you go to powercompanyclimbing.com, we'll send you in every direction to find it, whatever your podcast app of choice is.
Nice.
Perfect. Well, Kris, thanks so much for chatting with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Man, thank you guys, Jonathan and Emily. This was great. And I'm stoked to listen to everybody else's more than anything. I'm such a junkie. So.
That's
Awesome.
great. We have our first true fan already.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank
Thanks,
you guys.
Kris.
Thank you. So again, that was Kris Hampton and me flexing my metaphorical muscles throughout the show.
Yeah, big metaphor man.
Big metaphor guy.
Yeah.
Really great chat though. Kris is such a great guy, and it was a pleasure to have him on the show. He was actually recommended to us from a previous guest, which was Semi-Rad's Brendan Leonard. If you haven't listened to that episode, check that one out.
And make sure you subscribe to hear all of our future episodes with amazing guests.
Yep. Check out exploreinspired.com/Stokecast for all the show notes as well.
I bet that's important. Yep. Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Join us next week for Cody Townsend. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Emily Holland.
And I'm Jonathan Ronzio. We'll catch you next week with another episode of the Stokecast.